Because the investigation has taken so long, and because the Ramseys publicly don't appear to be cooperating with police, even some of their closest friends and staunchest supporters are starting to wonder.
I really feel that this murder has divided the friends up into virtually two different camps.
Judith Phillips had been a close friend of Patsy Ramsey for 14 years. Their families even moved to Boulder from Atlanta about the same time.
I believe that there has been more effort made in the cover-up following the murder. I think something terrible happened in that house, and I feel that those individuals, Patsy and John, have an insight as to what happened.
It's the Ramseys. Linda Hoffman, who cleaned house for the Ramseys 3 days a week, still stands by them.
John and Patsy didn't have anything to do with killing that little girl. And if they did, if it's proven that they did, I'll never trust anybody the rest of my life, because I never seen anything but a loving, kind, wonderful family.
In 1998, Patsy's sister Pam gave a rare interview where she said the following.
For me, it's got to be someone who knows. We're dealing with someone who knows us, not just knows our names or have been around us for a while. We're dealing with someone who knows us intimately, the intimate details. We're dealing with someone who had access to the house, access to personal living knowledge.
You think you know this person?
I believe I do.
You think John Bonet knew this person?
I definitely do.
Do you think she trusted this person?
Yes.
Well, you're not wrong.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Who do you think Pam Paugh, Patsy's sister, is implicating here? Well, who else could it be but the housekeeper? Now, just based on that last statement, do you agree that the housekeeper is being implicated? Let's listen one more time.
We're dealing with someone who knows us, not just knows our names or have been around us for a while. We're dealing with someone who knows us intimately, the intimate details. We're dealing with someone who had access to the house, access to personal living knowledge.
You think you know this person?
I believe I do.
Do you think John Bonet knew this person?
I definitely do.
Do you think she trusted this person?
Yes.
As early as page 4 of Linda Arndt's report, the detective indicates that Patsy's first thought when seeing the ransom note was that it was written by her housekeeper. This is a quote from that report. The note had been written on a legal pad-sized paper. Patsy said she originally thought the note might have been left by her housekeeper. Before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So from then on, the housekeeper comes up again and again and again, almost half a dozen times, all on page 4. That's in the first 25%. That's very early on in terms of this report, which is dealing with a lot of things, lots of different information, and it quickly gravitates to the housekeeper being the sort of dead ringer, not only as the suspected writer of the ransom note, but the prime suspect for committing the crime, who would have a motive. I mean, for example, who had keys, who had access? That's the word that Pam Paugh repeats quite a few times. Someone who had access, someone who had access. Well, who did have keys, access to the Ramsey home? That's also addressed on page 4 of the report. Arndt writes, I asked Patsy who had keys to her home. Patsy said the woman who was responsible for housekeeping at her home. That's the first person she mentions. That Linda Hoffman-Pugh had a key to the home. Who knew that the Ramseys were flying to Michigan? Who knew about that trip? Who knew that the Ramseys wouldn't be home? Well, that's also mentioned right in the beginning. according to the report. The family was going to fly to Michigan to spend time at their summer home. I asked Patsy who knew about this trip. Patsy said some of her close friends knew and the housekeeper knew. Then also, who did Patsy suspect had taken JonBenet? So who did she suspect had written the note? The housekeeper. Who had access to the house? The housekeeper. Who did Patsy suspect had taken JonBenet? The housekeeper. According to the report, I asked Patsy if she could think of anyone who might be responsible for JonBenet's disappearance. Patsy told me that her housekeeper, that's her first suspect, had asked to borrow money on December 24th. Think about that date, the day before Christmas. Patsy told me that she had a Christmas party at her home on December 23. Linda Hoffman was supposed to clean up from this party on the morning of December 24th. But Linda Hoffman had phoned Patsy on the morning of December 24th. Linda Hoffman asked Patsy if she could borrow some money. All of this is coming right up to the moment of the incident. Patsy had said, yes, we will give you money. Patsy told me she had loaned money to blank in the past. And I'm sure that is that blank part is also Linda Hoffman. Blank had phoned Patsy again on the afternoon of December 24th. Blank was crying. Blank said she needed to borrow $2,000. Patsy thought the money was needed for dental repair for someone in her family. Patsy told Blank that she would write a check for $2,000. Patsy said she would leave the check on the kitchen counter. Now consider this. Was the ransom note written in order to implicate the housekeeper? If so, what ruse was the writer trying to sell? Well, consider what we're potentially dealing with. A reference to a foreign faction that no one has ever believed, and perhaps it was meant to be unbelievable. Deliberate spelling errors, including of the words possession and business, trying to indicate someone not so well educated, meant not only to misdirect away from the true author, but perhaps mislead towards someone lacking in a formal education, perhaps like a housekeeper. Most compelling of all, the relatively small ransom demand of $118,000, which suggests someone intimate with the Ramseys, but also someone who was not particularly well off and who also knew about John's bonus. Think about also, would a foreign faction need as little as $100,000 to keep their show on the road? It turns out the housekeeper was not only in financial trouble, but had asked Patsy to loan money right up to the time of this incident. In fact, Patsy had agreed to leave a check for $2,000 on the kitchen counter for the housekeeper, I believe, to pick up when she was meant to enter the house while the Ramseys were away. What better person to implicate than someone who is meant to come into the house when they are away? And where's the ground zero of circumstantial evidence? Well, isn't it the kitchen? There's a flashlight standing up and in plain sight. The ransom note, pen and paper, was sourced there as well. And the note itself is located close to the kitchen as well. The kitchen essentially was the housekeeper's domain, isn't it usually? So what do you think? Do you think the housekeeper committed this crime? I don't. I don't think the housekeeper is a credible suspect precisely because the Ramseys have identified her as such. Also, her handwriting doesn't come close to matching the ransom note, and I think there's obviously no question in terms of DNA. She is an incredible witness, and she provides astonishing insight into an area of this case which, if you're not careful, can become a sort of twilight zone, and that's the broken basement window. And that's the critical area that we still need to figure out. What does she say, this person with intimate knowledge of the Ramseys and the house, perhaps no one with as intimate knowledge, what does she say about the broken basement window? I mean, what do you think the housekeeper who came to clean the Ramsey home 2 to 3 times a week said about the broken basement window? What do you think she said about it? Oh, yes, John did break it. It's been broken for months. Do you think she said that? Now, we know, according to John, he'd broken it, and it had been broken for months. Well, the housekeeper contradicts the Ramsey's statement in an interview with the Star dated June 20, 2000. This is quoting from that article. Another thing that made me think Patsy had staged the whole crime was the broken window in the basement. I used to clean their house 3 times a week. If something was broken, Patsy had me clean it up. On the morning of the murder, police found a broken window in the basement, just a few feet from the room where JonBenét's body was found. John Ramsey told the police that he had broken the window to get into the house months before, when he was accidentally locked out. But I think, these are her words, I think that is a lie. So she doesn't believe it. Based on her experience, based on her knowledge of the house, based on her being in the house, based on her cleaning the basement, none of that stacks up. I agree with the housekeeper about the when of it. John says the basement window was broken for a long time and that the housekeeper was actually meant to clean it up. Think about it. That suggests the housekeeper knew the window was broken, was told it was broken, was asked to fix it, or her husband was asked to fix it, and that this was a theoretical access point that she had into the home. And what did Patsy's sister Pam say?
We're dealing with someone who knows us intimately, the intimate details. We're dealing with someone who had access to the house, access to personal living knowledge.
And now here's the critical insight. Isn't Pam implying that that personal living knowledge was the broken basement window? Or certainly the idea of a broken basement window? She says it wasn't broken. So who do you believe, the housekeeper or the Ramseys? The housekeeper goes on to say, if there had been broken glass in the basement, Patsy would have told me to clean it up. Another thing that didn't make sense, John claimed he was locked out on that day when he supposedly broke the window, but he never used a key to come in the front or side door of the house. He always opened the garage door from his car with his remote and came in through the garage entrance. I think Patsy broke that window herself on the night she killed JonBenet. So that's obviously her theory of who committed the crime and who covered it up, to make the police think there was an intruder, and John concocted the story about breaking the window. This is an incredible admission from the housekeeper. She says, I think someone broke that window on the night JonBenet was killed. That's the important inference to draw here. It's also interesting what another former Ramsey housekeeper says about the basement window, and this was on the Peter Boyle's radio show. He says to Linda Wilcox, the former housekeeper, tell us about the window that keeps coming up. Linda Wilcox answers, I'm not certain of this one. I may be 40% sure of this because I wasn't in that room all that much. The grate. First of all, if you were going to break into the house, that isn't where you would do it. You do it in the side door to the garage. This is an elementary point, but it's also plain and simply true. And think about it. If Linda Hoffman did write the note, why would she need to break in through the already broken basement window? Why would she need to do that? Because she had a key. She didn't need to break in. She had a key. She could just unlock for herself. Going back to Linda Wilcox, if you move that grate and go down into that window, first of all, you're going down into a very dark room. Underneath was bookshelves just full of stuff. And just below that was this big basket with this huge Easter bunny in it. I mean, that room, it was cluttered, it was crowded, and it was dark. Not an ideal place to take anything in or out. Bear in mind, if you were breaking in through that window, you'd be breaking into a dark space, and you'd need to sort of stumble across it to find a light switch, which you probably wouldn't want to turn on anyway. So it really wouldn't be a good spot to get through without making a noise and putting yourself kind of into jeopardy anyway. Linda Wilcox repeats herself on the point that stumbling around in a dark, cluttered basement was a recipe for disaster and a surefire way of waking up the sleeping occupants. She also adds, but also I had cleaned those windows on more than one occasion in the basement. This is confirmation that both housekeepers had cleaned windows and had cleaned windows in the basement. Well, if there was a broken basement window, Linda Hoffman would likely have known about it while cleaning down there. So when was the basement window broken and by whom? And is John telling the truth about telling the cops about the window there and then, that morning? or is Linda Arndt's report more reliable, claiming that the cops told John, not that John told the cops, and certainly not that morning?
Let me tell you what I believe.
Anyone want to hear my theory on this? When was it broken, by whom, and why? Well, let me know in the comments. I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.